What's up guys, Lifting here, and this is a video build guide for the Dual Elemental Siege Ballista Scion character that I've recently been playing since the release of 2.1. In this guide I will show you everything you need to know to get the build running. The build is suited for both softcore and hardcore, it can clear the highest level maps, and it is Atziri viable. The defenses of the build lies in having a high life pool, having a decent amount of evasion, using a granite flask, and using the Arctic armor skill. And as with any other totem build, you also indirectly become much more tanky as the totems, or in this case ballistas, aggros, and soaks up the majority of the damage. Now let's talk skill gems. Your primary attack consists of Siege Ballista, greater multiple projectiles, faster attacks, weapon elemental damage. If you get a 5 link, add in slower projectiles, and if you have a 6 link, add in added lightning damage. To curse and build up your frenzy charges, you will need frenzy, greater multiple projectiles, chain, curse on hit, and elemental weakness. And until you obtain a 5 link, you can leave out the chain. For single target, I also recommend adding an additional 4 link Siege Ballista setup consisting of Siege Ballista, faster attacks, weapon elemental damage, and slower projectiles. This setup is optional, you can use whatever else you want to use, but I like using this for bosses. For auras and extra damage, you'll be running Anger and Wrath to scale your elemental damage, and Arctic armor to reduce incoming damage. And in this setup, I also recommend adding in the Flame Golem for the extra damage it provides. And lastly, I suggest linking 2 Wall Haste Gems, Enduring Cry, and Increased Duration. This setup is however optional and not required for the build, so it's up to you if you want to add something else in there or if you want to use this setup. Alright, so let's talk about the skill tree progression for the build, guys. And what you're seeing here is the full build. As you can see, it requires 114 points, and there's a few optional notes you can pick up or leave out if you want to, but I'm going to cover these as we go through it. So I'm going to reset the tree and I'm going to show you how I suggest you path through the skill tree. However, do keep in mind that I suggest leveling up with dual flame totems, so the skill tree pathing I suggest is going to reflect that choice for early game leveling. And then when we get to it, I will tell you when I suggest you start to switch over to Siege Ballistas. So let's reset the skill tree, and keep in mind that for this build we're interested in nodes that grants us extra life, mana regen, evasion, totem damage, and attack speed, and of course elemental damage to scale the elemental damage, and then a few aura nodes, and finally jewel sockets throughout the skill tree. So I'm going to show you how we go about picking these up. And so we're going to start here as the Scion, pick up the mana regeneration nodes and mana nodes. This is going to help you sustain the cost of your totems, both the flame totems while you're leveling, but also the Siege Ballistas later on in the game, and then pick up Shaper for more mana regen and life regeneration. From Shaper, head in this direction, and then up here, pick the Totem Life and Resistance node, and then Ancestral Bond. This will allow you to now summon 2 Flame Totems while you're leveling, and this is what's going to allow you to summon 2 Siege Ballistas as well, instead of just 1. From Ancestral Bond, I suggest heading down and picking up Constitution for a nice life boost. From Constitution, we have to pick up Totemic Mastery for a nice totem damage, life, duration, and placement speed bonus. And in this case, it's up to you if you want to go through the offensive route that gives your totems more damage, or if you want to go through the defensive route that's going to make them more tanky. In this case, I like the offensive route, but it's completely up to you. From Totemic Mastery, we are also going to pick up Celestial Judgment up here for a nice elemental damage increase. From Celestial Judgment, we're going to pick up Devotion for a nice life boost, and don't forget the remaining life node here. Then for the next 36 points we're going to spend for the build, we're going to head back towards the Scion starting area. We're going to pick up the attack speed nodes. This is not going to help you with your flame totem leveling, but it is going to benefit the Siege Ballistas when we eventually pick these up. Then head into Harrier for the attack speed bonus and movement speed bonus, and of course the cast speed benefits your totems as well, the flame totems that is. From Harrier, head down and pick up Ballistic Mastery for a nice damage increase. Then pick up Heart of the Oak for life and life regeneration, and then Primal Spirit, primarily because of the increases to maximum mana and mana regeneration, but also for the 20+ to strength and intelligence. From Primal Spirit, I suggest picking up Coordination up here for a nice 12% increased attack speed, then Blood Siphon, and then eventually Trickery for a nice increase to elemental damage. From Trickery, I suggest becoming a little more tanky, and we're going to do that by picking up the Unrelenting notable down here, which is going to increase our life pool, but it's also, together with the other skill points, going to reduce the mana cost of the skills that we cast. And this is important. This is going to allow us to run Siege Ballista while reserving a lot of our mana with auras. From Unrelenting, we're going to head back towards the shadow part of the tree, up by Trickery, and then we're going to pick up Elemental Focus for a nice elemental damage increase, and then Cold-Hearted Calculation for increased attack power and also mana regeneration. Then from here I also suggest picking up 3 more life nodes down here by the Scion to become a little more tanky to increase our survivability. And it should of course be said that at any point in time while leveling this build, if you need more life earlier on or after this, then simply pick up the remaining life nodes here. We're going to pick them up eventually anyway, but if you need them at a certain point in time, then simply pick them up. Now at this point in time, we're going to start using the Siege Ballistas. But in order to scale the damage of the Siege Ballistas, it is important that we also start to use the Anger Aura and the Wrath Aura. However, when you activate both of these auras, 100% of your mana will be reserved and you will not be able to cast your Siege Ballista. To prevent this, or to still be able to cast the Siege Ballistas, we're going to free up some of that mana that is reserved, and we're going to do that by picking up Sovereignty over here. After having picked up Sovereignty, I also suggest you pick up Charisma down here by the Ranger. These two clusters, Sovereignty and Charisma, will reduce the amount of mana reserve by 24%, and you should now be able to use your Siege Ballistas together with those two auras. You may even be able to use your Arctic Armor at this point in time, but if you aren't, then don't worry, you'll be able to pretty soon. Then after having picked up Charisma, we're going to head back towards Sovereignty again, and we're going to pick up Purity of Flesh for a nice maximum life increase. After having picked up Purity of Flesh, we're also going to pick up Resolute Technique down here at the Keystone. Resolute Technique will make it so that our hits can't be evaded, however we can never deal critical strikes anymore. But since this is not a crit build, that is not an issue. Resolute Technique makes the hits of the totems much more reliable and is a nice damage boost to our build. Then to scale the elemental damage of our Siege Ballistas, we're going to head in this direction and then pick up Catalyze. We're going to go in this direction. Catalyze is going to give us a 24% increased elemental damage with weapons, and keep in mind that the damage of the totems are directly scaled from the bow that you are using. So the more elemental damage you have on your bow, the more effective a node such as Catalyze becomes. And then to further improve our elemental damage, we're going to head in this direction, pick up Elementalist for the 10% increased elemental damage, but also the 12% to all elemental resistances. From Elementalist, I also suggest picking up Discipline and Training for the nice life boost, and then finally Righteous Decree for a nice 22% increased maximum mana and 6% reduced mana cost of skills. After having picked up Righteous Decree, you should be able to run both Arctic Armor, Anger, and Wrath, while still being able to sustain the mana cost of your Siege Ballistas. And since your Siege Ballistas are using elemental damage, I suggest heading over towards this part of the skill tree. Pick up this jewel socket here if you have the Static Electricity unique jewel. If you don't have it, of course, you should wait by picking this up, but if you have it, now is a good time to pick it up. The way this jewel works is that the more dexterity that is allocated within the large radius of the jewel, the more flat lightning damage it is going to add to the build. And with the amount of dexterity there is in this radius, this amounts to something like 90 additional flat lightning damage. And while that may not sound like much, keep in mind that this flat lightning damage is going to be scaled by nodes such as Trickery, Elemental Focus, Elementalist, Celestial Judgment, and so on and so on. So it actually amounts to a lot in the end, and that's without taking the weapon elemental damage increases from your gear into consideration. So get your Static Electricity now and socket it into this jewel socket if you can. Again, if you can't afford it or if you don't have it at this point in time, simply spec out of it and then do it whenever you can instead. For the next 21 points, we're going to pick up Finesse for the increased attack speed, then the Evasion and Life Notes here by the Ranger, then head back towards the Scion Life Wheel, pick up the remaining life notes, and then the only thing that's really left to do for the build is to pick up the remaining jewel sockets and one last life cluster. And I should of course say that if you already have really good jewels before this point in time, you can pick up these jewel sockets earlier. If you don't, now is a good time to get some good jewels, and I will show you what kind of stats you need to get on your jewels in just a minute. So pick up these two jewel sockets here, pick up this jewel socket, head up towards the temperate part of the tree and pick up this jewel socket up here, then head down towards the Scion again and pick up this jewel socket. And now for the last 3 points you're going to pick up, you need to spend them on Hired Killer for more life. That is the full skill tree. This is how you need to go about branching through it. And now, before we continue and talk about gearing and stats, affixes and so on, let me give you a few leveling tips. And so, as I mentioned before, I suggest leveling up using Flame Totem, as this skill is very efficient even without good leveling gear. And while it isn't necessary to increase the damage of your Flame Totem while leveling, I suggest using the unique talisman Knight's Hold or a +1 to fire gem, scepter or wand, and then putting your Flame Totem into either of these items. If using the scepter or wand, I'd recommend linking it with added lightning damage and faster casting as well. Later on in the game, after picking up Sovereignty and Charisma as demonstrated in the skill tree just before, I suggest getting yourself a 4-linked fast attacking elemental bow. Then add in your Siege Ballista skill gems and supports and start using it as your primary skill. Make sure to activate Wrath and Anger at this point in time as well, as they greatly increase the damage. The ballistas may feel a bit slow when switching over at this point in time. Fortunately, they scale really well as we level, and they gradually become stronger and stronger. If possible, try to get some attack speed jewels early on and add them to the skill tree to improve the attack speed of the ballistas. It makes them significantly better to use. And with that said, make sure to, from the beginning of the game, to get all of the required skill gems and support gems and have them level up from the beginning, so that when you switch over to ballistas, they will be as effective as possible. As for the bandit quest rewards, you should help Oak on normal difficulty for the extra HP, kill them all on cruel for the additional skill point, and help Kraden on merciless for the +1 to maximum frenzy charges. Lastly, let me give you some gear and item recommendations, and as I explain this, I will show some examples to the right on the screen. To scale the damage of any elemental based attack build such as this one, you are primarily looking for 3 affixes on your rare equipment. These are flat added fire, cold or lightning damage. Secondly, you need to look for attack speed, and finally the last one is the increased weapon elemental damage affix. It's also important to understand that since Siege Ballista is considered a bow skill, then it directly scales its damage and attack speed of your bow weapon. That means that the more elemental damage and attack speed your bow has, the more damage and attack speed your ballista is going to have. So basically, to scale the damage of the build, make sure to first of all get a high attack speed bow, and then make sure the bow has a ton of added elemental damage on it. Then make sure to get rare items such as the gloves, rings, amulets and belts that has the affixes we talked about before, the flat added elemental damage, attack speed and increased weapon elemental damage. As for defensive stats, the only thing you need to worry about is capping your elemental resistances, of course, then get life, and then finally evasion. And as a general rule, try to aim for at least 70 flat life on each rare item after reaching level 60. And as for the jewels, the 3 most important stats you need to get is increased attack speed with bows, and increased totem damage. Again, if you have them early on, try adding these jewels as soon as possible to the skill tree after switching to Siege Ballista, as they add a ton of damage. If you find yourself in need of more dexterity or intelligence, I recommend either picking up the 30+ notables in the skill tree or trying to craft it on your gear using the master crafting benches. Finally, for flasks, you should get 2 hollowed or divine life flasks of staunching, depending on which type you prefer, 1 amber granite flask of iron skin, a ruby, topaz or sapphire flask depending on the content you're farming, and an amber quicksilver flask of adrenaline to increase your movement speeds. As for unique items, for this build there is 4 different ones to choose from. None of them are mandatory, 2 of them are recommended, and 2 of them are completely optional. The first and most important is the Drill Neck Quiver. Since Siege Ballista by default has 100% pierce chance, Drill Neck is going to add 100% increased damage to the skill. It also adds a nice attack speed bonus, evasion and some life. I would really recommend getting this quiver if you can afford it. Secondly, I also recommend getting the static electricity jewel for a nice damage boost. And since we've already talked about this, refer to the skill tree section of the video and see how and why to use this skill gem. Thirdly, if you can afford it and make it work with your resistances, I also strongly recommend getting yourself a lightning coil. The 30% damage taken as lightning damage is a huge bonus to your survivability. The item is, however, optional. And then the last item I recommend is an Alpha Sow. This helmet will make your auras more powerful, thus increasing your damage, and it will free up 8% more mana to make it easier to cast your totems. And just as with the lightning coil, this item is completely optional. And that's it, guys. Remember, if you have any questions, then the best way to contact me is to join me at my Twitch live stream. The link is below. Otherwise, feel free to ask your questions below in the comments or by going to my forum post on the Path of Exile forums. I will do my best to answer any questions that haven't already been answered in this video. Now remember to subscribe for more Path of Exile content. Thank you for watching, and bros, do you even nerd?